Hello, my friends, and welcome to Quartet. So nice to have you with us. I'm Jon Petersen from the Arlington Institute, and we congregate like this every 2 weeks to make a deep dive into some of the most kind of provocative and interesting and important things related to the big change that's going on in the world today. We're a quartet. There's 4 of us, and that includes Gregg Braden. Hello, Gregg. How are you, sir?
I am well. I'm coming to you from our little studio outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico. I'm happy to be home for a few weeks writing a new book. So I'm looking forward to this conversation today.
We're looking forward to having you out here back to Berkeley Springs to talk about it at the end of the year.
Yeah.
Kingsley, Dennis from the UK. How are you, Kingsley?
Thank you, John. I'm well, thank you. From a very wet UK, and hello again to Penny and to Gregg, and to everyone listening.
Penny Kelly, how are you?
I'm great. So it's good to be here. Hi, Gregg. Hi, Kingsley. Hi, John. And hi to everybody out there. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, so nice to have you all with us. We get together like this, like I say, every 2 weeks, fortnightly. And we try to look at something that's really big and important. So let's get to our topic of today. Recently we've talked about, as a matter of fact, these questions are all about our last session together, which was fundamentally questioning whether history, as we understand it, or as we've been taught, is in fact true. And this is just an extension of the larger environment that we live in, because you can ask these questions about, is it true, to just about anything that you think about or you hear these days, not only because of the kind of propaganda or the political or whatever reasons, but also because of the technology that's now available. And so the whole kind of definition of reality and truth is very subjective and up in the air these days, and it's hard to figure that out. And so then you say, how do you navigate this space, right? If everything's a moving target and it's going 3 different ways at the same time, how do you make sense? How do you know what's good and what's not? And so I thought today it'd be really kind of fun for all of us to kind of go through the list of who are the resources, who are the people, who are the websites, what is it that we all look at that gives us our sense and our perspective and builds our paradigm, for that matter, of how we know, how we think reality works. And so, Penny, maybe we can start with you.
In terms of the question of the day, what's real? I really don't concern myself with what's real here, because I don't look at the world that way. I watch what people are doing. I listen to what they're saying. I see if there's a match, and then I go from there. So that's like my basic thing. But in terms of like what sources do I use to determine what's real, I use the real source. I have been fortunate enough, because of Kundalini, to have been into that source, that Godhead, and have developed a relationship with that over 45 years. And that's where I go to get, I take my ideas, I take my thinking, and I say, give me some ideas, or give me some feedback, or give me some input, please. And I get it, and it's amazing. So the source is my source. That's the big deal. In terms of online sites, there are approximately, I was going to bring the list and read it, but it's way too long. It's 2 pages, single space, of the different sites that I visit. I don't follow anybody, nobody, but I go places and look, what are people saying? What are these guys saying? I listen to mainstream media to see what the latest propaganda is. And then I listen to a whole bunch of other official newspapers from other countries, especially TASS in Russia. I'm not sure I can say it, Xinhua in China, the English version of that, Haaretz in Israel, places all over the globe because I want to see what other people's perspectives are in other countries. And then in terms of like who has the most creative and best ideas, my gut reaction to that was the kids. The kids have the most creative and the best ideas. Now, they don't often have much experience, and stuff isn't tested, and we're dealing with serious issues in the real world. But that tendency to look at what do the children need is something that I think we need to incorporate as one of our sources to give us a sense of what do we really need to be doing in the world. And I want to, I think the whole question is based on what is real? What does real mean? And so I have a couple thoughts here. Is it something that we taste or touch or see? Or is it something that we talk to? Is it what other people want you to do and be? And if you look at, for instance, the whole question of, what's real, brought up the story of Pinocchio. This is a story that it's an old story. And Pinocchio was originally modeled, Geppetto, and the story of Geppetto and Pinocchio was originally modeled after Joseph, the father of Jesus, the carpenter, and Pinocchio was Jesus. And what does this story tell us? There's a whole bunch of symbolism in it. The whole focus is, are you being real? What are you doing? And so Pinocchio doesn't go to school. So what does that symbolize? He doesn't want to learn. Can we be real if we don't want to learn? He finally gets some money from Geppetto to buy some books. I can't remember the exact thing he was going to do with it. What does he do? He goes to the movies. So what does that symbolize? People buy into illusions. And he gets thrown out of the movie before he gets hooked all the way. But then he ends up with another little bit of money, and he invests in a money tree. And what does that symbolize? Why would he invest in that? He gets conned. And that's it. People are conned by the popular illusions that are out there. And then he ends up in the circus. That's what happens when you get caught in the whole, what I'm going to call the rat race. It's a circus. It's a three-ring circus. And what does he end up with? Donkey ears and a tail. He looks like an ass. And there's the story of a whole lot of people who don't become real. In the original story, the original Pinocchio was taken out and nailed to a tree. In the Disney version, he gets swallowed by a whale. And voila, what's the whale? It's a whale of a society. It's a whale of a challenge. It's a whale of the business of life. And he gets out of the whale and he goes home and he goes to school and he takes care of business. And what has he done? He's conformed. And so is the message, you have to conform in order to be real? Or can you only be real if you accept some conforming influences? So that whole question of real, from my point of view, and I'll end with this, it's the feeling of life. What's real is feeling. It's a feeling of life, feeling of joy. It's the sound and the fury and the excitement and the drama of life. And you take that in and you sit with that and you work with that. That's really what's real.
Jon, this was a really interesting question for me, and the way you asked it. What sources give us a sense of what is real in the world? And I think I'm going to make a distinction between real and factual. I think it's all real. It's all real because it's in our consciousness. Factual are demonstrable events that we can actually hang our ideas upon. So I'm going to preface this by saying we all live our lives, we heal our bodies, we choose our politics, we make our choices, we choose our relationships based on the way we've been taught to think about ourselves and our relationship to the world. And there is an ancient and ongoing battle for our thoughts and our beliefs to direct us to accepting certain thoughts about us and our relationship to the world. So when we witness whatever it is that's happening in the world, I think we have to bear in mind that it's all happening within that umbrella. There is a movement to indoctrinate and direct us into thinking and accepting concepts and limitations about ourselves. So I begin with that, knowing that whatever I'm seeing out there, none of it is 100% accurate. None of it's 100% truthful. All of it is coming from a place of a slanted perspective, a tainted perspective. So with that in mind, I spend a tremendous amount of time looking at different sources, knowing that every source I'm seeing is skewed to some degree. But like Penny, I like to see what all sides are thinking. So I'm a scientist, and I begin a lot of what I do looking and perusing scientific journals. They are technical, they are wordy, they're not easy to read, and I'm going to be very honest, very straight. There was a time in my life, John and Penny and Kingsley in our community, when I really believed that science would be the last bastion of honesty and truth. And during the last 3 years, what we saw was that science was bought out, and there were things that were published in peer-reviewed journals that were not true. They were later retracted. Very few people saw the retractions. It's happening right now. But I still look at the scientific journals because the new discoveries are happening so quickly. For example, there's a journal called Science. It comes out every 30 days. The discoveries are so fast and furious that they have a weekly supplement because they can't encapsulate it all in that 30 days. So every week, the new discoveries, and it's across the board from tech and Silicon Valley to biology and new discoveries in epigenetics and the human body and paleontology and physics and astronomy, I mean, everything. So I begin there. Socially, if I want to see what's happening, I have a few sites that I peruse, and you also asked, what individuals do we follow and who has the most creative ideas? So I'm going to kind of lump these all together. I want to see a big picture of what might be happening in the world. I look at the Epoch Times, and Penny, you and I have talked about that. I think we both follow those. They have a good overview, and they've got some very good specials. They do deep dives into some really good specials I think is worthwhile. I check out Al Jazeera, and I can tell you when I was in my hotel room in London, and the events occurred in Israel on October 7th, Al Jazeera and the media from India were more factual than anything I saw in the United States, as well as RT, Russian TV, English version of RT. They gave facts on the ground that most Americans still to this day are not allowed to see because it violates our community guidelines, and they think American consciousness can't handle the brutality of what was actually shown. So I do watch them. I follow Martin Armstrong on occasion. I don't agree with everything he says, but I think he's got some really good ideas. Glenn Beck, I've always enjoyed. I don't agree with everything he says, but he definitely thinks outside the box. And he catches a lot of heat for what he's saying. So that means he's probably onto something. There are some news services out of Australia. SBS World has some really interesting, and I'll be straight up, it's not always easy to see their perspective of America. Seeing America through the eyes of somebody that's not an American. And they're pretty brutal sometimes, and I think they're right on. So that's world events. Finance has its own, its own group of people. There is an interviewer, David Lynn. I follow David Lynn, and he has good guests to help us understand, what's happening in the market. Lynette Zhang of ITM Trading is really on top of staying ahead of a broken financial system. She's a hoot to listen to. I really enjoy listening to her. But I think she's got some really good actionable ideas of what people can do as we're watching this financial market buckle and collapse. There are other sites. Coin Bureau is a very good place to look at general news as well as crypto news. And crypto is in the news a lot because it is threatening traditional banking to the degree that BlackRock, Vanguard, and Elizabeth Warren are all involved in this right now. And that's all I'll say about that. Community, there are certain websites that are really interested in community. There's, I did an interview. He's now become a friend. His name is Jean Nolan, Jean, but it's Jean Nolan. Inspired is the name of the website. Really good with just all about community and the potential. And he's hosted some of the guests you've had at Postscript or Transitions talks as well. Some individuals that I think have some really good ideas. Stephen Gardner, if you watch him, really is plugged into military perspectives and has a lot of retired military that he talks to. And I'm going to say Michael Schellenberger is one of the people I used to follow, and I'm going to be, from my perspective, this is my personal opinion, somebody got to him and turned him, and he now is reporting things that simply are not true to support a narrative, especially what's happening in the Middle East. It's mysterious. I'm surprised. I'm saddened by it because I used to follow him a lot. But he's an example of, I think, how powerful this machine is that is out there. And then just the last couple, Kim Iverson used to be on a program called The Hill. Rising, she went on her own. I don't agree with everything she says. She can be very liberal, but for example, she did a really good expose on the homeless situation in America and offered some really good solutions. And so it was more than just reporting. She's saying these are the things that can actually be done. So I'll stop there. But I just wanted to share those. I mean, there's a whole list I could go through. This is just a sampling. But if our viewers are looking for something concrete, and if you don't agree with these, check them out, and then they'll lead you to other places. But I think we owe it to ourselves, John, to look beyond the mainstream, and it takes a lot of effort because there is no single source that I'm aware of right now.
Like the both of you, I kind of really looked at the question that John sent to us, because the question was, what sources give us a sense of the real? And then John was suggesting such as online sites and who we follow, etc. And I find you both picked up the same kind of incongruence there, because our sense of the real and my sense of the real, I do not look for it online for sure. And I would say very openly now, if you want a sense of the real, do not look online for it. Because the only sense of the real is going to come through the inner sense. That has to be developed. And as you said, Gregg, the external information, the factual information can supplement, but you need a center of discernment to be able to filter that supplements. So, and also this is coincidentally, I had a conversation just a couple of days before, and now I was saying to my friends, I feel like, I have to step back even further from the overwhelming information that's coming on. And, I've been stepping back gradually even more, because a few years ago, I was getting information everywhere. I was, interested in getting a lot of information, and I've stepped back a huge amount now. I've not watched television for over 15 years. I just don't use television full stop, really. And I have a monitor that goes online, but I don't have any television for a long, long time. So, and I also feel, as you mentioned, Gregg, about this journalist you mentioned, Schellenberger, I also feel that in the last short period of time, there's been a great deal of infiltration of the alternative media as well. Because alternative media has really sprung up in the last few years, especially when because of censorship, new sites came up. And I think there's an element of corruption that's gone into these sites as well. So we've got to be very careful, because just because they're against the status quo doesn't mean that they're not corrupt. You know, there's this false kind of opposition. So we have to be careful. So I'm going to give you an example of my day, to give an example of where I kind of feel are my sources. When I get up in the morning, over breakfast, I look through a news feed, which is like a, you know, agglomeration of different titles, you know, world media, and I just get the headlines, so I don't need to read any more. So so in the morning over breakfast, I look at the headlines in my news feed from across the world, and then I look in my I don't have any Instagram account, I don't have any Twitter X account, I don't look at Facebook. I only use it for posting work material. I don't scroll through Facebook at all. I have a few Telegram channels that I get information from, such as Geopolitics and Empire and Inside Paper. So I look through, after scrolling through the news feed, I look at a few Telegram channels over breakfast. And then I get to work. I do my writing, my research, my correspondence, and I don't look at the internet. And then in the afternoon, I will maybe look at some videos and interviews, and I do some reading. By 6 o'clock, my computer day is done. I close down my computer when I go to cook my dinner at 6 o'clock, and it doesn't open again for the rest of the evening. Now, with you guys, we go to 7 o'clock my time, so you know I go longer. On rare occasions, I will do an interview in the evening if it's with an overseas company, that because of the time difference. But very rarely, I try to keep my evenings for myself. So when it comes to dinner time, I close down the computer. In the evening, I do reading books. I do listen to music. I listen to a lot of music, which I like to relax to. And I may watch some interviews online. And that's it. I've really dropped down looking online. I don't really follow any websites now. I used to do, but I don't really follow any websites. I don't follow anyone, but I will listen to certain people doing talks or interviews. And one of them is Whitney Webb. And I find Whitney Webb a good source of joining all these stories and dots together, and you know, getting behind the charade of the mainstream narrative. I sometimes pop on a video of Martin Armstrong as well. For many years, I've been listening on and off to Chris Martinson from Peak Prosperity, since he put out his crash course on economics, but now he's been much more wired to what's going on in the world. If I want to see about, let's say, to decode the narrative such as around the UFO file and that, I would dip into the dark journalist. But actually, my go-to for sources is books. I go back and reread books and that again and again, because I find that actually these books are a lot more relevant than the fleeting news. Because if I read a book 10 years ago and I go back to read it now, I get a different take from it because I'm in a different position. But I think books have a kind of organic way of developing the inner being and giving nutrition that allows us to discern external information. So I don't trust external information, but I will pick it up. But my sources are age-old kind of books or thinkers. And I repeatedly read such people as Idris Shah, Rudolf Steiner, Gurdjieff, J.G. Bennett, Aurobindo, a lot of what we may call esoteric philosophy, because my way of understanding how to receive source is you have to have an internal grounding that you then can measure these external forms of pseudo-truths and illusions and some tidbits of information. But I think it's very important to discriminate between information and source material. So I would encourage anybody to really get people, communities, real life stuff, getting the inner grounding. You don't have to read books if it isn't your take. And also, like Gregg, I came from an academic background. I read a lot of academic papers, but I found also that they have been corrupted for a long time, because to get into journals, you have to pass their filters. And, and I remember years ago when I was writing my first book, an academic book called After the Car, I did papers for it. And I was looking at, post-peak oil societies. And back then, back in 2005 and that, I was questioning the climate narrative. And I wanted to publish papers, and the journal said, you have to call it global warming. You have to go for it. And I said, but what if we go into an ice age? What if we go into climatic change, not global warming? No one to accept it. So a lot of academics are forced into publishing with the narrative to get the credits for the publishing that goes back into their university's career, as Gregg well knows. So, so even you can't trust top journals academic because they have their filtering purposes. So my source is good old books and conversation.
When I sat down and started to think about this, I said, well, I kind of define two major categories, and one of them is conventional and one of them is unconventional. I'm a futurist, and so I got to understand about oil and gas and energy and politics and all those kinds of things. That would be conventional space. But then if you get into the larger reality, the metaphysics, if you will, spiritual, other dimensional kind of things, that becomes unconventional. And so within those two big categories, I kind of cut them in three different segments. And one of them is, what are those things that are important? Not that I necessarily at all agree with, but what are really important that you have some knowledge about what's going on? Because if you don't, then you're in a sense ignorant. You can be blindsided. You do not contribute. It does not become a part of the contributing factor in how you think about things or how you understand reality works. And then I have a category called credibles. So there are a whole bunch of folks, some of whom you've already been mentioned, that you just know that they're being honest and they're credible, may not agree with them necessarily, but that they're important to go back to and kind of as a touchstone a little bit, that it's kind of the solid folks. And then I have a category called novel and provocative, which is where do the cool ideas come from? And again, it's not so much the idea itself, it's what it gets you to think about and how you relate it to and chain it to other kind of things. And so let me quickly run down this, and I'll just put a little bit of narrative with it so that you get an idea why I do all of this. Now, if you start with conventional and you say what's important, then as those of you who are in our audience who have followed this, you know that I think that Vladimir Putin is important. You may not agree with him, but you better know what he thinks and what he says. And so I follow his speeches, and I listen to his press conferences, and I certainly watch the Tucker Carlson interview and all of many other kind of things that come around that. Speaking of Tucker Carlson, I think that in today's kind of environment, this is a man of great integrity who is really trying his best to try to unpack how things work. And he works his way across a large spectrum. And so I think it's important to hear, you don't have to watch every one of his videos, but to hear what he's talking about. Donald Trump is a player. If you don't know what he's saying, he could be off doing something crazy and you wouldn't know about it. And so you need to know about him. There is a group here in Washington. I belong to a group in Washington, which is a Salon. It's a group of kind of policy wonks and people from around think tanks and things in Washington who get together every month in one of the kind of clubs downtown. And they have a speaker that comes in, but they have a dialogue and online dialogue all the time. And it's just really fascinating to see how all these different kind of people respond to what's going on in the world. There's a site called the Gateway Pundit, which is, everybody's got their perspective on these kinds of things. So it's colored a little bit, but it's a really useful kind of, again, like Gregg says, you run across the headlines or like Kingsley does and read and see what's going on. There's a site called The Hill, which has already been mentioned, which is a good way to very quickly understand what they're doing in our on the Congress on the Hill. There's one called Suspicious Observers that talks about what the state of the sun is and sunspots and solar projections and other such things. That's important because there are really good reasons to believe that the sun is doing things that we haven't seen before, and it could generate a solar flare that could be a real problem. Now, the credible conventional things is the kind of a news feed that I look at is called the Quora Digest. And the Quora Digest is all kinds of different kind of things. And that, along with the Epoch Times that's already been mentioned, is a very useful thing. And Roman, who was one of their anchor guys, is just marvelous and very interesting to listen to, as well as Jon. And I can't pronounce his last name, who does some wonderful interviews there. Paul Craig Roberts publishes very insightful ideas about the social changes that are going on in this country. Austin Fitz, Catherine Austin Fitz, who used to be on my board, is a brilliant woman who has amazing big picture understanding about how things work. And so I try to stay current with her. There's another news feed that I like, is called 1440 Daily Report, which is another news feed that promotes itself as being objective and balanced and so on. And it's, again, that's a thing that you can look at very quickly. Obviously, I follow Marty Armstrong and Armstrong Economics. There is another site called the Ethical Sceptic that is just extraordinary. This is an unknown individual, a science. He's not just a scientist, but he is a scientist. He's an extraordinary businessman. He is unnamed. There's no way that, I really tried to figure out who he is. He is one of the most extraordinary brains on this planet with amazingly broad experience. And he then builds a scientific kind of criticism of things like global warming and so on. He has built the most compelling case in the world for why the oceans are warming, because there's underground volcanoes. Now, if you want novel and provocative kind of things in this conventional space, then there's the Unz Review, UNZ, Unz Review. And you're not going to agree with everything there, but boy, those people are unhinged and ready to kind of work anything, anywhere. And it's just, you just look at that and you say, wow, like Penny says, I never thought of that. And what are they doing? Anyway, there's a news feed called Telegram called Bearded Patriot, which just, God, the guy unloads maybe 100 things a day up there. That's just a stream of consciousness of what's all going on, which is always very provocative. Ed Curtin has got a site called Need to Know, which is very informative of things around finance and economics and stuff. There's a new site called QuantumRun, which is a group almost certainly out of the Bay Area or California somewhere, that is a futurist operation that have lashed up a bunch of technology and things. And so they go trends research and a whole kinds of things. And it's really very useful from, kind of a professional point of view. And then they do a digest. They do a daily kind of feed of things, kind of like our newsletter, only theirs is somewhat different. Steve Kirsh is a guy who is very interesting if you're interested in the whole business of COVID and where that's going and so on. And Jon Rappoport, of course, is an old-time writer who is, again, just he's just bulletproof. He just goes after him, and he's very convincing. If you think that they've ever isolated the COVID virus, then you ought to read Jon Rappoport. He will show you and convince you that nobody's ever isolated it, and so they're all just working on derivative ideas and stuff. There's a guy named Dave Hodges that's got a site that's called the Common Sense Show. Now, I'm not a really big fan of Dave Hodges, but what he does is that every day he's got about he has a half a dozen articles, and I can skim that down and I say, that's what those guys think. That's what's hot in terms of these Christian conservative kinds of people. And so you can quickly kind of get a sense in, what they're thinking about. Fast Company, the business magazine, has got a site called Fast Company Compass, and they publish that on a regular basis, maybe every other day. And so that gives you into the business sector area, new things that are coming on there. And then again, if you want novelty and provocative things in the conventional area, then Tucker Carlson is just really got something going there. I mean, he's one of the few people. I watched the whole thing about an interview about his life and who he is and what he thinks about. I think it was just in the middle of the night last night. And this is a man of integrity, and you may not agree with him, and I'm surrounded by people who don't agree with him, but he is really doing his best to try to deal with the big fundamental issues of today, and he's fearless.
We in this community, we're blessed, and we've made a priority in our lives to go out into the world and seek out this information to help others in our community. A lot of people don't have that luxury. Their lives are full of raising families. My neighbors here in northern New Mexico, most of them are working 3 jobs, trying to keep things together. They don't have time to do this. So I think this highlights what we already knew, and that is that I think we are sorely lacking in a news source that is credible, at least in the space that we're in right now.
Right. You make a very interesting point. We've talked about this offline before, and that is that think of the value it would be if there was a news source that was just the high level, intellectual, thoughtful, and that integrated, and that you could trust, that was finding these new ideas that were coming. I mean, it'd make a huge kind of contribution to the emergence of this new world.
Yeah.
You could say we do have a source, just that no one's listening.
Very good, Kingsley.
Ask a question. It worked for Neil Donald Walsh. He started asking questions and he got answers.
Yeah.
Maybe we're not asking the right questions, or not thinking in the right way. We just sometimes we put too much responsibility on other people to find our answers for us. We have to, meet it halfway. So yeah, we need a good list, but we have to do the work ourselves to meet it.
I keep seeing that there's going to be an aggregator kind of service that comes up and says, these are the top 10, places to go if you're looking for government information, medical, financial, education, whatever, news happening over here, over there. And people will have to pay for that, but it'll be accurate. And I think part of what our news has to be, if you look at what we used to have, the propaganda element of it, that could be, don't take this wrong, anybody, but that could be used, or that element could be transformed to become kind of a teaching element. And that is the elephant in the room, actually. The fact that we don't one of the things I get from my people over and over again is, please say more about blah, 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 whatever the question is. And I think that what I have started to do is, here's the issue, and here are different ways that you can think about it. That is not really being done on a large scale. And because so many people have lost critical thinking abilities, I think that's a real service.
No, I agree, Penny, and Kingsley as well. I think where we're coming to it as we close out this session is two things. We've got to know with absolute certainty who we are, rock solid certainty of what our values are, what is it that we cherish in our personal lives, our family lives, our community, society, nation, on our planet. We've got to know that with absolute certainty. And I think that is what comes from our relationship and our ability to cultivate that relationship with the source that we're talking about. And it's through that lens then that we interpret whatever it is that's coming in the world around us, and give meaning and significance, if it warrants that, to whatever it is that's coming in the world around us. So I think the two very, very different things, but they're deeply related, because we will respond to whatever the universe brings to our doorstep through that lens. So this is a good conversation. Maybe part one of a deeper dive we can take into this.
And just to add on to that, Gregg, just if I may finish on there, is that I think one of the commonality that brings us all together is that we also have a bigger picture perspective. And I think that's very important. And a word of warning to people about information is that if you go out there and just want to look at this and grasp at this and grasp at that, that's how the information sphere works. It wants to throw this and this. That's okay to grasp at this information, but we need to then put it through the kind of the right brain, bigger picture filter. If we don't have a bigger picture whilst you're collecting information, you're going to go off balance. So I would say nurture your bigger picture capacity as a foundation to start going and looking for the fractals.
I think you're absolutely right, and that's very important, and it's a good thing to end on here, because if you don't have a framework for interpreting what you're reading, then you are being driven by the interests of whoever wrote or published the information. And so this all works and works to our benefit if we are carrying the narrative and we understand where we're going, and we look out and find the information from these different kind of sources to support or change the direction or other kinds of things of what we already know, or what we think we know about who we are and where we're going. So thank you all three of you, and thank all of you who are in our audience and our viewers. We appreciate it that you come and be with us these times. We got lots of nice comments from people about how much they appreciate all of this, and we appreciate you. We do this here at the Arlington Institute. We're located in a little resort town in the Appalachian Mountains in West Virginia. We're about 100 miles from Washington and Baltimore, and we've got a whole series of programs. You can find out about what we do at arlingtoninstitute.org. And one program in particular that we really like is called Transition Talks. So we have a speaker that comes here to Berkeley Springs, and then we live stream the information all over the world every month. And Penny's going to be with us. Dave Martin will be here in April, and Penny in May. Are you in May?
Yeah, May 18th, I think.
Yeah, Gregg will be with us toward the end of the year. And we get significant kind of groups of people together, and great community and good fun, as well as kind of very provocative information. And so you can find all of that, like I say, at Arlington Institute, and we hope you'll go there and then hunt around and see what you can find. Thank you all, and I hope that all of you in our audience will come back and be with us in 2 weeks, because our subject in 2 weeks is going to be, how can we use AI to help build a new world? And so they'll give you all a chance to think about that a little bit. And we'll come back and say, you know, how do we use the big high leverage technology that everybody thinks about as being dystopian to help build kind of a utopia. So thank you so much, and be well. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you, everybody. Have a great week.
Okay, now be well.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.